Something inside me just broke and I couldn't pretend it hadn't. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. Though it's been weeks since that night unraveled everything I thought I knew about us. The way his words echoed in the dim bar. Slurred, but sharp enough to cut through the noise and laughter. Leaving me standing there frozen. Feeling smaller than I ever had. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he laughed. As if it were nothing but a joke between him and his friends. But to me, it was the end of a dream I had held for 5 years. For 5 years, I believed in us. 5 years of late-night talks, shared secrets, laughter that made my heart feel full. Then came the 8 months of engagement, the endless planning, the hope, the whispered promises. We were supposed to be building a future. But in that moment, all I felt was the weight of a future crumbling around me. The bar was thick with the smell of spilled beer and stale smoke. The kind of place Carter and his friends frequented when the world outside felt too much. I had shown up early, hoping to surprise him after my girls' trip, a simple gesture, but one I thought he'd appreciate. Instead, I got to hear his laughter. The easy, careless way he tossed my name around like I was nothing more than a punchline. I didn't say anything right then. I couldn't. I just slipped out, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap, and I felt the tears come, silent and slow. That night, I packed a bag and left for Ryan's place, my brother's apartment across town. It was the first time in months I didn't try to pretend everything was fine. Before I tell you how it all fell apart, you should know what our life was like before that night. What our love felt like, even with all its imperfections. Because it wasn't always like this. Our little apartment was small, but it was ours. The kind of place you step into and feel the warmth settle around you like a soft blanket. I could smell Carter's cologne mixed with the faint scent of coffee from his morning routine. Our Sunday mornings were sacred pancakes on the griddle, the quiet hum of the radio playing something soft in the background, and the way he'd laugh when I tried to flip a pancake and failed spectacularly. Carter was the kind of man who wore his heart quietly but deeply. His voice was calm, steady, even when he was stressed out about work. I loved the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was the only person in the room. We had our little rituals. Leaving notes for each other on the fridge, Sunday hikes in the park, late night talks about everything and nothing. Ryan was my rock through it all, my brother. My confidant. My shelter when the storms came. He'd call me every morning just to check in. His voice always carrying that mix of teasing and genuine care that only a sibling can master. Our families got along well enough, though Carter's mother, Diane, was always a bit complicated. She had a way of inserting herself in subtle ways that sometimes made me uneasy. But I brushed it off, telling myself it was just her way of showing she cared. The engagement was supposed to be our happy beginning. I wore the ring every day, tracing its curve when I felt overwhelmed. We talked about the wedding, the honeymoon, that little cottage by the lake we both dreamed about. It felt like the future was shining bright ahead of us, and I was ready to step into it with him. But beneath the surface, things were shifting. I just didn't see it, not at first. It started with small changes. Carter would come home later, distracted. His texts slowed. He'd flinch if I asked about his day or tried to make plans for the weekend. Once, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen. A name I didn't recognize flickered before he slammed it shut. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe work was stressful. Maybe he was just tired. But the knot in my stomach tightened every time I saw that look in his eyes, like he was carrying something heavy he didn't want to share. One evening after dinner, he was unusually quiet. I asked if something was wrong, and he shrugged, saying, "I'm just thinking." But I could tell it was more than that. The way his hands trembled slightly as he sipped his wine. The distant gaze. The sharp sigh when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to reach him to pull him back to us. But every time I touched the topic of marriage, his smile felt forced. His answers vague. Then came the nights he'd go out with his friends. The ones where he'd come home smelling like whiskey. His laughter too loud. His jokes too biting. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself that love was complicated. That relationships had their ups and downs. But deep down, I was afraid. Afraid that something was breaking between us. Something I couldn't fix with love alone. Then came the night I overheard it, the thing that shattered me. I hadn't planned to go to the bar that night. It was supposed to be a surprise. A small gesture to reconnect. But when I arrived, the sight of Carter laughing with his friends, the casual way he spoke my name, it hit me like a freight train. The words he said, "I'd be more excited to marry her if she were prettier," hung in the air, cold and cruel. I saw the smirk on his face, the way his friends chuckled like it was all a joke. But to me, it wasn't a joke. It was a betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I just turned and walked away, the night swallowing me whole. The streets were quiet, except for the distant hum of cars and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. My heart felt shattered, but my body moved on instinct. That's when I called Ryan. I told him I needed to stay with him for a while, that I couldn't face Carter. Couldn't face the lie I thought we had built together. Ryan's apartment was a sanctuary that night, quiet except for the soft ticking of his old wall clock and the faint scent of lavender from a candle he'd lit. When I stepped inside, I was barely holding myself together, the weight of Carter's words still pressing down on my chest like a heavy stone. Ryan didn't say much at first. He just wrapped me in a hug that felt like home, like the one safe place left in a world that suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. I could hear his steady breathing, and somehow, that small sound steadied me too. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, catching dust particles that floated lazily in the air. But the warmth didn't reach me. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. Ryan made me the bitterness matching the ache inside. It wasn't long before Ryan said what I was already thinking, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to go through this alone, Jess." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I don't know what's worse, the words or the laughter. Like I'm a joke." He squeezed my hand. "You're not. And you deserve better than that." But even as his words sank in, I couldn't shake the gnawing questions that haunted me. Was it really just a careless joke? Or was there something deeper behind Carter's hesitation? What had changed in the man I loved? Days passed, but I couldn't stop replaying that night in my head. The bar, the words, Carter's careless smile, and then the quiet truth that began to surface when Diane, Carter's mother, called me one afternoon. Her voice was hesitant, almost reluctant. "Jessica, I think you deserve to know the whole story." My heart raced. I had expected blame, anger, maybe even cold dismissal, but what I heard was something else entirely. "Carter, he's been struggling," Diane said, voice trembling just a little. "There's someone at his work, Sophia. They've grown close, more than just co-workers. It's not what you think, but it's shaken him." I felt my breath catch. "You mean emotionally?" "Yes. It's complicated. Carter's been distant because of it, wrestling with feelings he doesn't understand." She paused. "And there's more. His father left when he was young. Abandoned them. Carter's terrified that history will repeat itself." The weight of that revelation crashed over me. Suddenly, the cracks in Carter's walls made sense, his hesitation, his fear, the distance. But it didn't excuse the cruelty. Not the joke at the bar. Not the way he made me feel small. That evening, I met Carter at the little park near our apartment. The golden hour wrapped around us like a fragile veil, the fading light softening the edges of a conversation I dreaded. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. His hands fidgeted nervously, eyes darting away when I tried to hold his gaze. "Jessica," he began, voice rough. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that. The joke was stupid, cruel. I'm sorry." I swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Why didn't you tell me about Sophia? About your fears?" He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Because I was scared. Scared you'd leave. Scared I'd hurt you. I never wanted to lose you. But every day, I felt like I was fighting a war inside my head." The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the words left unsaid. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, to fix what was broken, but the hurt ran too deep. "I needed honesty," I whispered. "Not jokes or secrets." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry for breaking your trust." But apologies weren't enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind of difficult conversations with Carter, with Diane, and eventually, a family meeting that no one wanted but everyone knew was necessary. Tyler Reed, one of Carter's closest friends, the same friend who had egged on the bar joke, was there too. His smirks and dismissive remarks felt like salt in a wound. Through tears and tense voices, the truth surfaced. Tyler had been planting seeds of doubt in Carter's mind, feeding his fears, twisting his insecurities. Carter's father's abandonment had left scars, yes, but Tyler's toxic influence had turned those fears into walls between us. The room was thick with emotions, anger, sadness, regret. Diane's eyes welled up as she looked at her son, the man she had raised, now breaking under the weight of his own demons. "I wanted to believe he was ready," she said quietly. "But sometimes love isn't enough when the past keeps pulling you back." Eventually, the wedding was called off. A decision made quietly, painfully, but with a shared understanding that some wounds couldn't be healed overnight. I moved into my own apartment not long after, a place filled with fresh paint, soft linens, and the faint scent of lavender that Ryan had gifted me. Therapy sessions followed, where I slowly peeled back layers of pain and betrayal, learning to find myself again beneath the hurt. Carter began his own journey too, seeking help, confronting the ghost that had haunted him for years. Now, as I sit here planning a solo trip to that little lakeside cottage, the one we dreamed of for our honeymoon, I feel something new stirring inside me. It's not the pain or the anger. It's hope. Hope for healing, for rediscovery, for a future where I am whole again on my own terms. The cottage is quiet, peaceful, a place to breathe, to remember who I am, beyond the heartbreak. And maybe, just maybe, a place to start over. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of my new apartment, a quiet space I was still learning to call home. It smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen, but underneath, I could still detect the faint remnants of old pain, like a shadow that clung to the corners of my heart. I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the outline of the engagement ring that no longer adorned my finger. The emptiness where it used to be was both a relief and a reminder. A relief because I was finally free from the weight of expectations that never felt quite right anymore. A reminder because it marked the end of something I had loved deeply, no matter how broken it had become. Ryan's voice was still fresh in my mind from our last conversation. You deserve better, Jess. Don't ever forget that. He had been my anchor through all the storms, steady and unwavering. I was slowly beginning to believe him. Life after the breakup was like learning to walk again, tentative, painful, but necessary. Some days, the silence in the apartment was deafening. I missed the way Carter's presence filled the room, even when we were arguing. The smell of his cologne on his jacket, the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor, the way his hand felt warm in mine during late-night talks. But those memories were tinged with the bitterness of betrayal. The harsh laughter, the careless jokes, the secret emotional connections that had shattered our trust. Therapy became my refuge, a place where I could unravel the tangled threads of hurt and confusion. My therapist, a calm woman with kind eyes, never pushed too hard but always listened deeply. In those sessions, I learned to face the pain instead of burying it. I discovered parts of myself I'd forgotten, the strength beneath the tears, the courage to choose me first. One afternoon, Diane called again. This time, her voice was softer, more tentative. Jessica, she said, I wanted to check on you. I know I wasn't always the easiest person to deal with. I was surprised by the humility in her tone. I appreciate that, I replied. It's been hard, but I'm trying. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, Carter's going to therapy now. He's finally facing what he's been running from. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hope for his healing, but another part was wary. Trust wasn't something you rebuilt overnight. Thank you for telling me, I said simply. Sometimes, healing looked different than I imagined. Less like a fairy tale and more like a long, winding road. One evening, Ryan and I sat on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. I told him about the cottage, the one Carter and I had planned to visit for our honeymoon. I'm going there, I said quietly. Alone. He looked surprised but nodded slowly. It's your journey, Jess. You deserve to find peace there. The idea of going to that cottage was both terrifying and freeing. It was the place where we dreamed of a future together, a future now gone. But it was also a place I could reclaim for myself. Packing for the trip, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, fear, but also a flicker of excitement. I packed my favorite sweater, a journal, and a camera. I wanted to capture this new chapter, to write my story on my own terms. As I zipped up my suitcase, I realized something important. This trip wasn't about forgetting Carter or the past. It was about embracing my own strength, about healing the parts of me that had been broken. I was ready to face the silence, to listen to my own voice again. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the lesson this journey had taught me. That love is complicated, messy, and sometimes painful. But above all, love must start with yourself. Would you have had the strength to walk away, even when your heart was breaking? Tell me in the comments. If you found a piece of your own story here, please subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of heartbreak, healing, and hope. The drive to the cottage was quiet. The hum of the car engine, the only sound breaking the stillness of the early morning. The air smelled different out here. Fresh pine, damp earth, and that unmistakable crispness that only a lake in late spring can hold. I rolled down the window just enough to let in the breeze, and it felt like the world was slowly exhaling, breathing with me. This place was supposed to be ours. The dream we whispered about on long car rides and lazy Sunday afternoons. Now, it was just mine. Pulling up to the small, weathered cabin, I ran my hand along the wooden railing, rough from years of rain and sun. The scent of wood smoke lingered faintly, mixing with the damp smell of moss growing along the stones of the pathway. It was peaceful here, almost painfully so, but I needed this quiet to start untangling the mess inside me. Inside, the cottage was simple. A small fireplace with a scattering of kindling, a worn sofa with a colorful patchwork quilt folded on top, and windows that framed the lake like a living painting. I could hear the gentle lap of water against the shore and the distant call of a loon. I poured myself a cup of tea from the chipped kettle, the steam swirling up, warm and comforting. Sitting by the window, I watched the sun make its slow crawl across the sky, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. But peace didn't come without the ache of memories. I found the old photo album on the shelf, pictures of Carter and me, smiles frozen in time, frozen hopes. I ran my fingers over the glossy pages, tracing our faces. There was the night we got engaged, his hands trembling as he slipped the ring on my finger. The hikes in the fall, when the leaves were golden and the air smelled like earth and possibility. I wanted to cry, to scream, to shout at the unfairness of it all. But instead, I just sat there, the silence stretching around me. Healing, I realized, isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it without letting it crush you. That evening, I took out my journal and began to write not about Carter, not about the betrayal or the heartbreak, but about me, about the parts of myself I had lost along the way, the dreams I'd put on hold, the laughter I'd stopped hearing in my own voice. I wrote about the nervous excitement of this trip, the strange comfort in being alone. I wrote about hope, not the kind tied to anyone else, but the kind that blooms quietly inside when you decide to take your own hand and keep walking forward. As the days passed, I explored the woods, walked the shoreline, and sat by the fire with nothing but my thoughts. The cottage, once a symbol of what might have been, slowly became a place of renewal. I thought about Carter's fears, the ghosts of his father's abandonment, the toxic influence of his friends. I thought about Diane's quiet pain and Ryan's unwavering support. I thought about myself, about how far I'd come and how much further I could go. I wasn't sure what the future held. Maybe Carter and I would find forgiveness someday. Maybe not. But what mattered most was that I was finding my way back to myself. The lake reflected the sky, calm and clear, a mirror for the hope growing inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next, with a heart that knew its own worth. Returning to the city after the trip, the air felt different, heavier somehow, weighted with the life I had left behind, but also lighter, carrying the fragments of healing I had gathered by the lake. My apartment, once foreign and cold, now felt like a space I could inhabit without ghosts whispering in the corners. The first few weeks back were a jumble of small steps. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, took long walks in the park, and started to find joy in the little things again. The smell of fresh bread at the corner bakery, the hum of the city at dusk, the warmth of a good book in my hands. But the hardest part was learning to trust myself again. One afternoon, Ryan and I met for coffee at our favorite cafe, a cozy little spot with faded brick walls and the scent of roasted beans hanging thick in the air. As we sat sipping our drinks, he looked at me with that same steady gaze that had kept me grounded throughout. "So, what's next?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I know I want to keep moving forward on my own terms." He smiled, nodding. "You're stronger than you think." I believed him. Meanwhile, Carter was working through his own struggles. Or so Diane had told me when she called a few weeks ago. He was seeing a therapist, trying to unpack the tangled fears that had driven a wedge between us. I hoped, in my quiet moments, that healing was possible for him too. Not for us, necessarily, but for the man I once loved. It was strange to imagine a future where we might cross paths again without pain or resentment. But even if that never happened, I knew forgiveness was a path I needed to walk for my own peace. The days turned into months, and the edges of my heartbreak softened. I found a new rhythm work, friends, quiet evenings at home, and therapy sessions that peeled away the layers of self-doubt and pain. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, I realized I hadn't thought about Carter's bar joke in weeks. The sharp sting of those words had dulled, replaced by something gentler, a lesson learned about self-worth, honesty, and the complicated nature of love. I won't say it's been easy. Healing rarely is. But I've come to understand that sometimes the most courageous act is choosing yourself when everything else feels like it's falling apart. This journey has taught me that love, no matter how deep, can't thrive without trust and honesty. And sometimes, the greatest love story is the one you write for yourself. The news of our broken engagement didn't stay a secret for long. Word traveled through mutual friends, work circles, and even family gatherings. At first, I dreaded the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet pity in some eyes. But I quickly realized something important. I didn't have to carry their judgments. The family meeting had already drawn a clear line. The truth was out. Carter's hesitation, the emotional connection with Sophia, Tyler's toxic influence, all laid bare. It was messy, painful, but it was real. Carter's friends were a mixed bag. Some distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the fallout. Others tried to defend him, spinning stories that painted me as the unreasonable one. Tyler, of course, stayed silent, his smugness gone now that the truth was out. I felt no need for revenge. The exposure was consequence enough. At work, the tension was palpable. I heard hushed conversations, felt the weight of gossip, but I refused to let it define me. Instead, I focused on my projects, my goals, rebuilding not just my personal life but my professional one too. The way people treated me shifted, some with sympathy, others with respect for how I handled it all with grace. I realized dignity was a powerful form of resistance. Diane reached out occasionally, her tone softer now. She never tried to intervene or explain away Carter's actions. Instead, she offered quiet support, a reminder that even in broken families, there could be kindness. Most importantly, Ryan never left my side. His steady presence reminded me that family was more than blood. It was the people who showed up when the world turned upside down. The community's judgment wasn't my burden to bear. I chose to carry my story with honesty, vulnerability, and strength. That choice became my healing balm. Healing isn't a straight line. It doesn't happen overnight, or in neat chapters. For me, it was more like a slow unfolding, a daily choice to let go of what hurt me and lean into what could heal me. The apartment filled with new routines, morning yoga stretches that woke up my body, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, the quiet turning pages of books I'd long forgotten I loved, the walls that once echoed with silence now held memories I was creating on my own terms. Therapy became more than just a place to unpack pain. It became a mirror, reflecting back my strength, resilience, and capacity for forgiveness, not for Carter, but for myself. One day, as I walked through the park near my apartment, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming jasmine, I realized how far I'd come. The heaviness that once gripped my chest had loosened. The constant replaying of Carter's careless words was finally quieted by something gentler. Self-compassion. I caught my reflection in a store window and smiled a small, genuine smile. Not the forced one from before, but one that held hope. The path wasn't without setbacks. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I questioned if I'd ever truly be whole again. But with every setback, I learned to be kinder to myself, to treat my heart as I would a wounded friend. Carter and I never circled back to the idea of us. That chapter closed with dignity and honesty. But in those moments of silence between us, I forgave him not for what he did, but to free myself from the bitterness that threatened to consume me. Now, as I plan my days ahead, I carry a lesson I want to share. Sometimes, the hardest love story is the one where you learn to love yourself first. The one where you rebuild from broken pieces and find a new kind of peace. I often think about how love can be both beautiful and painful, how it can lift us to the highest heights and then, sometimes, bring us crashing down into the darkest valleys. My story is not unique in that way, but it is mine, and through it, I've learned that no matter how deeply someone else wounds you, your worth is never diminished. Healing is not forgetting or pretending that pain never existed. It's about giving yourself permission to feel, to grieve, and then to rise again. It's about finding the courage to walk away when love no longer serves your soul, and to choose yourself, even when it feels like the hardest thing in the world. If you've ever been broken by someone you loved, or faced betrayal that shook your foundation, know this: you are not alone. There is strength and vulnerability and power in rebuilding your life piece by piece. So, I ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you stay and fight, or walk away to find your own peace? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more voices that share the raw, real journeys of love, loss, and healing. Together, we can find hope in our shared struggles and strength in our collective healing. Thank you for listening.